everyone. This is Mallory Flowers on behalf of Jennifer Shelton Associates, and we are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. And welcome to our Webinar Wednesday series, and thank you all for joining us today. Our webinars are held every Wednesday in 2018 at 12 p.m. and 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and our speakers range from accountants to attorneys and other industry professionals. The full schedule for the rest of the year is on our website underneath the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we do not take questions. Our speaker's contact info is posted on the last slide, so if you have any questions, please contact the speaker directly. The recordings are on our website underneath the archived webinar tab, as well as on our YouTube channel. All right, and this is just a quick blurb about us. In the interest, Jennifer Shelton Associates is based in downtown Washington, D.C., and we help both product and service companies with federal contracting. Our clients are domestic and foreign, defense contractors and civilian, and our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles, including the GSA schedule. We can also help you with proposal writing and post-award contract administration. More information about our services and upcoming events can be found on our website. And here are some upcoming events, which you can find more information about on our website. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into today's presentation, which is the SBA All Small Mentor Protege Program, Myths, Realities, and Opportunities. And Stephen Cofrance is going to be our speaker today. You can learn more about his background on this slide. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today, and I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Mallory, and of course, thank you to Jennifer as well for inviting me to present today, and thank you for everyone for taking a few minutes out of your day to hear about the SBA All Small Mentor Protege Program, some of the myths, realities, and opportunities in a condensed fashion, about 20-25 minutes today. Again, my name is Steve Cofrance. I know many of you already know, but those who don't, managing partner of Cofrance Law LLC. We are what we call a boutique law firm. That means we focus on a specific area of law. Ours is federal government contracts. We're currently 8 attorneys strong, and we do nothing but federal government contracts law. So we help folks from coast to coast with federal government contracting legal needs, everything from bid protests and claims to DFARS compliance, subcontracts, team agreements, et cetera. One thing that we've been doing a lot of lately is helping folks with the SBA All Small Mentor Protege Program. And what we've seen from clients, others that my colleagues and I have spoken to, is there are some very common myths or misunderstandings about the Mentor Protege Program, what it is, what it does, and there are also significant opportunities available under the program. So this presentation is not intended to be a complete overview of the All Small Mentor Protege Program. That would be maybe a couple hours worth of discussion, but it's really highlighting some of the misconceptions and myths out there, as well as some of the important opportunities that this still relatively new program offers. Next slide, please. Let's get right into it. So the All Small Mentor Protege Program, some of you are familiar with it, some of you less so. This is an SBA program, U.S. Small Business Administration program. It is a business development program. And if you ask SBA, what is the All Small Mentor Protege Program? That's what they'll tell you. They'll say it's a business development program. The idea, the philosophy behind the program, because I always like to start when talking about the law and about programs with the underlying philosophy. Why does this program exist? What's it intended to do? And so SBA's philosophy in creating this program was, we want to provide a vehicle under which a mentor company, which is usually going to be larger, more experienced in the industry, often more experienced in federal contracting generally, is going to provide targeted business development assistance to a smaller, less experienced company, a small business. And because they call it all small, that means that any small business is eligible to be a protege. It's an extension of the SBA's 8A Mentor Protege Program, which has been around for 20 plus years. And so that's what it is. SBA will say this is a business development program. Who better to help a small business accelerate its growth curve, grow, learn, develop, than a company that's already been there? Somebody who's already maybe taken some of those hard knocks, has the resources, capabilities, experience to really help this protege company grow. So that's what it is. That's what it is. It's a business development program. In order to be an SBA approved mentor protege, you got to have a written mentor protege agreement. The SBA provides what they call a sample agreement. I hate in my practice to use the word template because that people just think there's a template for everything. But this is a case where you can and should start with that sample or template agreement on the SBA's website. No reason to reinvent the wheel. So use that sample agreement and then submit it. You have to fill out a lot. Just because the SBA gives you the format doesn't mean there's not a lot that you got to complete yourself. But once you get that agreement submitted, approved by SBA, they want to see a business plan. They want you to take a little training module online about the program. But after SBA approves it, and during the life of the mentor-protege agreement, now the mentor and protege are entitled to certain benefits under SBA regulations, and that's where some of these myths and some of these opportunities come in. It's with these SBA benefits that accrue under the mentor-protege agreement, keeping in mind, of course, that one of the protege's primary benefits is the business development assistance that it's getting from the mentor, or at least it should be. Let's go with the next slide. So myth number one, what do I hear most commonly with mentor-protege? It's probably this one, that a mentor-protege agreement is some form of teaming relationship. It's not. A mentor-protege agreement is not a team. There's no such thing as mentor-protegeing for a contract, if that would be a verb. Again, the mentor-protege agreement itself is nothing but a business development relationship, extends for a period of up to 6 years, 3 to 6 years under the SBA's regulations typically, although either party can terminate the mentor-protege agreement upon 30 days notice to the other with or without cause. But when SBA approves that mentor-protege agreement, SBA has not approved a prime sub-team, it has not approved a joint venture, it has not approved any sort of teaming relationship whatsoever. And so I have a lot of folks, clients, others I meet at industry events who say, you know, how does my mentor-protege bid on something? Well, the mentor-protege itself isn't an entity. It doesn't have a legal existence. You can't register your mentor-protege for an EIN or for a DUNS or CAGE, SAM, all those fun databases that contractors need to be in. But, and the reason I think this myth exists, mentor-protege, the mentor-protege agreement does let you separately establish prime subcontractor teams or joint ventures that have certain benefits that don't ordinarily exist, particularly with respect to small business set-aside contracts and socioeconomic set-aside contracts, meaning 8A, service-disabled, veteran-owned, woman-owned, HUB-zone. And so, particularly on the mentor side, is, you know, one of the chief benefits to the mentor, perhaps the primary benefit to the mentor, is this ability to participate in these special types of teaming relationships, particularly joint ventures, for set-aside contracts the mentor might not qualify for itself. And so you'll see the mentor kind of mentally skipping past the business development to what do they get out of it? They get a team. They want to go after these contracts, and you know now the public perception almost becomes that the arrangement itself is nothing but a team. But again, I've been there in the room with SBA itself talking about these agreements, and they say the teaming part is a benefit, but the mentor-protege isn't a team. The mentor-protege is business development agreement. Let's go to the next slide. All right, second myth that I get, again, related to teaming, specifically joint ventures. The second myth is, hey, we want to, you know, I'm a small business, or maybe an 8A, maybe service stable, maybe just a quote-unquote regular small business. I want to form a joint venture to go after a set-aside contract of some sort. Maybe it's a small business set-aside, maybe it's an 8A set-aside, maybe it's a service-disabled set-aside, et cetera. I got to get a mentor-protege agreement first, and then I can form a joint venture. And the answer to that question is maybe, maybe not. Maybe, maybe not. If you're a small business and your partner is large, and by large, and again, this is not a seminar or webinar on SBA size rules, which is an extraordinarily complex topic in and of itself, but assuming that we've now determined that the mentor company itself wouldn't qualify to bid on the contract opportunity that you're looking at, by way of size, because it's too large, it's Lockheed, it's Boeing, it's some large company, then yes, then in order for the mentor to be part of a joint venture to pursue that contract, you got to have mentor-protege agreement. So a large business can only be part of a joint venture to pursue a set-aside contract if there's a mentor-protege agreement between the members of the joint venture. That's really one of the key benefits of the mentor-protege program, is that the large business gets to be part of the prime contract team through a joint venture for set-aside contracts for which the mentor doesn't qualify. That said, if both parties of the joint venture are small, then the mentor-protege agreement is completely optional. You don't need a mentor-protege agreement to form a joint venture with another small business. And so, for example, if you are an 8A company and you want to pursue an 8A set-aside contract is a joint venture, and your potential partner is not 8A, but they are small, then you don't need a mentor-protege agreement. You can have one if you want, but you don't need one. And so it's optional at that point whether you need the mentor-protege agreement. And sometimes that's been for some of our clients, the deciding piece for them. They don't maybe have time to get a mentor-protege agreement submitted, approved, et cetera, before they need to bid a job, but they do have time to just simply form a joint venture, which often doesn't take very long. So again, mentor-protege agreement required for a large business to participate in a joint venture that would pursue a set-aside contract that the mentor is too large to qualify for itself. But if the mentor is a small business, if both parties to the joint venture are small businesses, then the mentor-protege agreement completely optional. You can have a joint venture anyway. The mentor-protege agreement's relationship to joint venturing is literally that it exempts the mentor from the size requirement, the requirement that the mentor be small. Next slide, please. Myth number 3, SBA approval. I was just reviewing a draft joint venture agreement yesterday that had this in there. The parties were going to go after HUB's-owned, woman-owned, or maybe small business set-aside contracts, and the draft joint venture agreement said SBA has to approve this agreement and has to approve all changes to the agreement. Ain't going to happen. I know that's not legal terminology, but ain't going to happen. The myth that the SBA has to pre-approve the joint venture agreement stems from the 8A program, because the All Small Mentor Protege program, as I mentioned, is essentially an expansion and extension of the long-standing 8A Mentor Protege program. And for 8A companies, when you're bidding an 8A contract, an 8A set-aside contract, or going after an 8A direct award, or what we typically call sole source contract, then yes, the SBA has to pre-approve a joint venture before a joint venture can be awarded any 8A contract, be it set-aside or direct award. That's true. That remains the case today, whether the parties are mentor protege or not. Any joint venture that's going to receive an 8A contract has to receive SBA approval before award. But for all other set-aside contracts, small business set-aside, HUB-owned set-aside, service-disabled, veteran-owned set-aside, woman-owned set-aside, economically disadvantaged woman-owned set-aside, SBA does not have to pre-approve the joint venture agreement. And in fact, to go further than that, the SBA will not approve the joint venture agreement. If you submit it to SBA and say, please approve this, they will send it right back to you and say, that's outside our scope. We don't do that. We don't pre-approve joint venture agreements outside the 8A program. Now, that's not to say that your joint venture agreement can be non-existent or fail to comply with all the mandatory SBA requirements for joint venture agreements, of which there are many. There are actually 5 separate regulations that the SBA has spelling out what needs to be in joint venture agreements that are going to pursue different types of contracts, one for small business and one for each of the 4 major socioeconomic categories. The rules are almost identical. And you still got to have a joint venture agreement that meets all those requirements. In fact, it's all the more important that your joint venture agreement meet those requirements for these non-prior approval contracts, for everything but 8A. Reason being that if you get awarded, your joint venture is named as the awardee, you're actually awarded the contract or named as the apparent successful offerer, someone can take a crack at you, a competitor, file a protest, challenging the award. At that point, the SBA will say, let's see that joint venture agreement and let's make sure it meets every last one, about 16 of them, the mandatory provisions that are set forth in the SBA's regulations, and let's also make sure that it doesn't contain any provisions that contradict or undermine those required provisions. And why I say it's even more important, if you're bidding an 8A contract, you submit a joint venture agreement to the SBA for approval and they don't like it, they'll usually send it back and say, fix it. We don't like this, we don't like that. You missed this regulation right here, you fix it, you send it back in, you still get your 8A contract. When it's not 8A and someone's filed a protest, if your joint venture agreement misses any requirement or has anything non-compliant in it, protest gets sustained and the contract goes away. So it's nice to not have to go to the SBA for the prior approval, but it does make it all the more important that the joint venture agreement be 100% correct, because any flaw in that joint venture agreement then could cost you a contract. The last thing I'd mention on this slide is if you're pursuing VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, SDVOSB or VOSB contracts, then the VA has to pre-approve the joint venture. And so the VA will say, we need to separately verify that joint venture in the VA's VetBiz database. And that verification is not just before award, it's before you bid, before you submit a proposal with the joint venture. And so it's not good enough that the lead member of the joint venture is itself verified. That's a prerequisite, but the joint venture itself needs to be separately verified. But again, that's only for VA, SDVOSB, and VOSB contracts. If you're bidding SDVOSB set-asides from any other agency, including DoD, then no prior approval is required. Next slide, please. Another myth, and this is one that is not very clear in the SBA's regulations, but one misunderstanding is that a protege can have an indefinite number of mentors in its lifetime. It's like, hey, mentor-protege agreement doesn't work out, it expires, whatever the case is, I'll get myself another mentor and just keep getting mentors indefinitely. And you might think that if you just read the SBA's regulations, but SBA's policy, and they've been very clear on their website, their All Small Mentor Protege website, is that a protege can only have 2 mentors in the protege's lifetime, period. 2 mentors. You might be able to have those concurrently at the same time. You might be able to have those consecutively, one and then the other, break in between, whatever the case is, but 2, period. And so a couple years ago when this policy was being discussed first, I was at the 8A National Conference, which was down in Florida that year, and an SBA official was talking about the rule, and some said, well, what happens if I'm a protege and my mentor and I just don't get along, and they I feel like I need to terminate the relationship after a couple months. They terminate the relationship because either party again can terminate it after with 30 days notice to the other. And does that still count against my 2 per lifetime limit? And the response in that meeting was, yeah, it does. Choose wisely. And I'm not sure that in every single case you maybe couldn't convince the SBA to give you another bite of the apple, but that's the big picture policy. 2 mentors per lifetime, so do choose wisely. I'm not really a fan of that policy, but SBA didn't take my opinions into account when it made this policy. For now, that's where we are. 2 mentors. If you're a protege firm, 2 mentors per lifetime. After the second mentor-protege agreement's done, you don't get another one ever. Now, on the mentor side, the mentor can have an indefinite number of proteges in its lifetime, only up to 3 at any one time, only 3 concurrently, but there's no restriction on mentors having an indefinite number of proteges over time. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about the opportunities, and we'll wrap it up here. So what are the opportunities? Obviously, there's some misconceptions about this program. Why do mentors and proteges want to participate in this program in the first place? Well, if you're the protege, as I mentioned, business development assistance. Business development assistance. That is the cornerstone. That's the SBA's philosophical cornerstone of this program, is that you as the protege should be getting assistance of whatever sorts you need to really accelerate your growth curve and take the next steps in your business. And that might be financial assistance. If you're in construction, certainly bonding assistance is very, very common. Might be help with marketing, might be help getting certifications in your industry, training in various aspects of procurement, introduction to customers, help writing proposals. It could be subcontracts from the mentor, or maybe you're subcontracting work to them to help you perform a bigger project. The bottom line is that the business development assistance you receive, it's not supposed to be generic. It's supposed to be targeted to your place. Where are you right now in your growth curve as a business? What do you need to take those next steps over the next 3 to 6 years? And what's the mentor going to do to help you get there, to help you get where you want to go, which is why the SBA wants to see a business plan when you apply to this program. So business development assistance as the protege, think carefully about that. My interactions, we work both with mentors and proteges, but not surprisingly, the mentors say, yeah, I want to do this because I want a joint venture for these set-aside contracts. The mentors are not usually sitting there around saying, man, think about all the wonderful things we could give for free to a protege. That's not usually their mindset. They're often, and should be, willing to do it to get the benefits that they want. But as the protege member, you've got to remember, don't just skip to the joint venture. Don't just skip to the team. You're very much underusing the mentor protege program if that's what you do. You should be getting business development assistance out of it beyond just teaming with your mentor. Next slide, please. Affiliation exceptions. The mentor protege agreement, I said, has certain regulatory benefits for the members, and one of them is a limited affiliation exception. And so affiliation, again, that itself could be an entire book, and at least in my book from 2012, it's 3 chapters worth. But affiliation at its core is the question of whether you, if you're a small business, is your size considered independently, or if SBA considers your size, will they add in the size of some other business? And that's a business that in some ways deemed to share common control with you. So if I own 100% of my law firm, I own 100% of a real estate holding company, those 2 businesses are affiliated because I control them both. Simple example. One way affiliation can arise is what's called economic dependence, which means that the small business receives the bulk of its revenues typically over time from a larger company, or through what's called totality of the circumstances, which means that the parties in the SBA's eyes, the 2 companies are deemed so interrelated that they're doing so much together that they're really not viewed as independent. Well, close relationships between a small business and a large business in particular can be problematic. The mentor-protege agreement provides a limited exception. It says that the mentor and protege, that whatever business development assistance the mentor is providing to the protege under that agreement can't be used to find affiliation control. Very important. And so, if you as a small business or you as a large business want to have an especially close relationship with another company over time, mentor-protege agreement can be a way to exempt those particular business relationships from a potential finding of affiliation or control. The key to remember here is that it is a limited exception. It applies to the things that you put in the mentor-protege agreement and that the SBA approved. And so if you put in the mentor-protege agreement, we're going to form a lot of joint ventures, we're going to form a lot of subcontracts, we mentor are going to give the protege a loan, all those things are exempt from affiliation. If you didn't put any of that stuff in the mentor-protege agreement, SBA never saw it, SBA never approved it, it could still be used to potentially find affiliation. So be sure to tailor your mentor-protege agreement to the actual business relationship that you want to have to make sure that everything's under the what we call the affiliation shield. If the relationship goes in a slightly different direction after the mentor-protege agreement is approved, you can go and should go back to the SBA and get an amendment to the mentor-protege agreement to add the new relationship in there. Next slide, please. I believe this is probably the last one. Final opportunity, contract access and competitiveness. And again, I mentioned mentors can be part of the prime contract team as a joint venture for set-aside contracts, even if the mentor vastly exceeds the size standard. So if you've got a contract, a solicitation out on the street, it's a $7 million size standard, $7.5 million size standard, you as the protege are a $5 million company and your mentor is Boeing. Ordinarily, you and Boeing cannot form a joint venture to pursue that contract because Boeing's slightly bigger than $7.5 million. But if Boeing's your SBA approved mentor, you can do that. Mentors really want to do that. The government often likes joint ventures when they understand them. They get the benefit of 2 prime contractors, in essence. That's the legal benefit of a joint venture. Also, the government is required under SBA regulations to consider the past performance and experience of both members of the joint venture. So if you've got Boeing in that joint venture, the government's got to consider Boeing's past performance and experience in its evaluation to the extent those are evaluation factors. Next slide, please. And that's all I've got, Mallory. I'm going to turn it back to you, and everyone, thank you for joining this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Stephen, for all of this great information. And again, if you have any questions, please contact Stephen with the information you see on your screen. And at 12:30, we are covering What If, GovCon Proposal Hearsays. So this concludes this webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.